It was a quiet Sunday afternoon at the Riverside City Zoo when 58-year-old Michael Thompson decided to take what he thought would be a peaceful solo visit through the primate exhibits, a routine he had maintained every month for the past 3 years since his accident had confined him to a wheelchair. But what happened in the next 20 minutes would forever change his life and spark a global conversation about animal consciousness, empathy across species, and the profound connections that can exist between beings who share the experience of physical limitation and vulnerability. Before I tell you this absolutely incredible true story that went viral around the world and left scientists completely speechless, I need you to do something for me right now. Drop a comment below telling me what city or country you're watching this video from, because I absolutely love connecting with viewers from all over the globe. And while you're down there in that comment section, make sure you hit that subscribe button and smash that notification bell so you never miss another mind-blowing story like this one. And go ahead and crush that like button, because I promise you this story is going to move you in ways you never expected. This is one of those rare true accounts that will make you see both humans and animals in a completely different light. So stay with me through every moment, because what the gorilla does is absolutely shocking, and you definitely don't want to miss any detail of this remarkable encounter. Michael Thompson had been an avid outdoorsman his entire life, a marathon runner and rock climbing enthusiast who had summited peaks across 3 continents before a devastating car accident 3 years ago left him paralyzed from the waist down at age 55. The transition from an active lifestyle to life in a wheelchair had been brutal, not just physically, but emotionally and psychologically. And Michael had spent the first year after his accident in a deep depression, barely leaving his home, pushing away friends and family, convinced that his life as he had known it was effectively over. It was his 10-year-old granddaughter Sophie who had finally broken through his despair by asking him to take her to the zoo, something they had done regularly before his accident. And though Michael had been reluctant at first, that first post-accident zoo visit had rekindled something in him, a reminder that there was still beauty and wonder in the world, even if he experienced it from a different vantage point now. He had become a regular visitor to Riverside City Zoo, finding particular solace in watching the great apes, their strength and dignity somehow helping him process his own struggles with his changed body and capabilities. The zoo was established in 1952 and was known for its progressive approach to animal welfare, with large naturalistic enclosures that tried to replicate the animals' native habitats as much as possible. And their gorilla exhibit was particularly impressive, featuring a family group of 6 western lowland gorillas, including a magnificent silverback named Marcus, who was the undisputed patriarch of the group. But there was another gorilla at this zoo, one that most visitors never saw because he was housed in a separate enclosure away from the main exhibit. And this was Congo, a 42-year-old male who had lived at the zoo for nearly 4 decades after being rescued as an infant from the illegal pet trade. Congo had been part of the main gorilla family for years, but as he aged, he had developed severe arthritis in his legs and hips, a condition exacerbated by the concrete floors he had lived on during his early years at the zoo, before modern enclosure designs prioritized more natural substrates, and the pain and mobility issues had made him increasingly isolated and irritable, leading zoo management to move him to a quieter, more accessible space where he could be more comfortable and receive specialized veterinary care. On this particular Sunday, Michael had arrived at the zoo around 2 in the afternoon, during the quiet period after the lunch rush when crowds were typically lighter, and he could navigate the paths more easily in his wheelchair without constantly having to maneuver around groups of excited children and strollers. He had his usual routine, starting with the small mammals, moving through the bird exhibits, and then spending most of his time in the primate area where, He would often sit for an hour or more just watching the gorillas, chimpanzees, and orangutans go about their daily activities. The zoo was doing some construction work in several areas, upgrading facilities and expanding enclosures, and Michael noticed more orange cones and temporary barriers than usual as he made his way along the familiar paths. He had just finished watching the main gorilla family, where Marcus the silverback was impressively displaying his strength by chest beating while his family lounged in the afternoon sun, when Michael decided to take a path he rarely used, a service road that was normally closed to visitors but was currently open due to construction redirecting foot traffic. This alternate path took Michael past the backs of several enclosures and through a more wooded section of the zoo grounds. And it was quieter here, almost unnaturally so, with thick vegetation on both sides and the sounds of visitors and animals fading into the background. Michael was enjoying the peaceful solitude, the dappled sunlight filtering through the trees, creating patterns on the paved path, when he heard a sound that made him stop his wheelchair abruptly. A deep rumbling vocalization that he recognized immediately as a gorilla. But it was coming from the wrong direction, from the path ahead of him, rather than from the enclosures behind him. Michael's heart began to race as he slowly pushed forward another few meters, and then he saw something that turned his confusion into pure terror. There, in the middle of the path, about 20 meters ahead of him, was Congo, the elderly gorilla who should have been safely contained in his enclosure, but was instead sitting in the open. And even from this distance, Michael could see that the massive ape was looking directly at him. For a moment, Michael's mind simply couldn't process what he was seeing. This violated every safety protocol zoos had. Gorillas didn't just escape and sit casually on paths where visitors walked, but there was no denying the reality before his eyes. This was a fully grown male gorilla, probably 400 pounds of muscle and bone, with the characteristic silver saddle marking across his back, indicating his age and status. And he was free and uncontained, and now aware of Michael's presence. Michael's first instinct was to back up, to turn his wheelchair around and get away as quickly as possible. But as he began to maneuver backwards, he realized with growing panic that the path here was narrow with dense vegetation on both sides and a slight uphill grade in the direction he needed to go. And his arms, strong as they were from 3 years of wheelchair use, suddenly felt weak and inadequate for the speed he needed to escape from a potential threat. He managed to back up perhaps 3 or 4 meters when his wheelchair's front casters caught on a crack in the pavement, and the chair jerked to a stop, one wheel hanging up on the uneven surface. And in that moment of struggling with his stuck wheelchair, Michael looked up and saw that Congo had stood up and was now moving toward him. Everything Michael had ever read about gorilla behavior, every nature documentary he had watched, told him that this was a worst-case scenario, that gorillas could be incredibly dangerous when threatened or when they felt cornered, that their strength was approximately 10 times that of an average human, and they could literally tear a person apart if they chose to attack. And here he was, trapped in a wheelchair with limited mobility, facing an enormous male gorilla who was closing the distance between them with each knuckle-walking stride. Michael wanted to scream for help, but his throat had constricted with fear, and all that came out was a weak croak. And he realized with horrifying clarity that even if someone heard him and came running, they would arrive too late. Whatever was going to happen would happen in the next 60 seconds, and there was absolutely nothing he could do to prevent it. Congo was now about 10 meters away, and Michael could see him in terrible detail. The massive head with its pronounced sagittal crest, the deep-set, intelligent eyes that were fixed on Michael with an intensity that seemed to bore into his soul, the enormous hands that were larger than dinner plates, and most terrifying of all, the slow, deliberate way the gorilla was approaching, not charging or displaying aggression, but moving with what seemed like purpose, like he had decided something about this encounter and was now carrying out that decision. Michael found himself doing something he hadn't done since he was a child. He closed his eyes and began to pray. Not articulate prayers with words, but simply a desperate plea to whatever force might be listening that his death would be quick, and that Sophie wouldn't be the one to find out first. And he braced himself for the impact, for the terrible weight and strength of the gorilla to crash into him. But the impact didn't come. Instead, after what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 or 15 seconds, Michael heard a different sound, a soft, huffing breath that was close, very close, and then he felt something that made his eyes snap open in confusion and disbelief, a gentle touch on his hand that was resting on the wheelchair's armrest. Congo was right there, so close that Michael could smell him, that distinctive musky odor of great ape, and the gorilla's enormous hand was resting on top of Michael's hand, not gripping or squeezing, but just resting there with a gentleness that seemed impossible from a creature of such size and power. Michael was frozen, afraid to move or even breathe too deeply, his mind racing to understand what was happening. And as he looked into Congo's eyes from less than a meter away, he saw something that he would later struggle to put into words. A kind of recognition, an intelligence and awareness that went far beyond what he had expected. And there was something else there too, something that looked remarkably like understanding or even sadness. Congo made a soft vocalization, a low rumbling sound that wasn't aggressive, and then, in a movement that would later be captured on security cameras and analyzed by primatologists around the world, the elderly gorilla slowly lowered himself to sit on the ground. And in the process of sitting, his movements became awkward and clearly painful, one of his back legs extending stiffly and his face showing what could only be described as a grimace of discomfort as he settled into a sitting position that kept weight off his obviously arthritic hip. It was in that moment that Michael understood, really understood what was happening. And the realization hit him so hard that tears immediately began streaming down his face. Congo wasn't threatening him, wasn't viewing him as an intruder or prey or anything to be feared or attacked. Congo had recognized something in Michael that no other gorilla in the zoo would have recognized: the wheelchair, the limited mobility, the struggle with a body that didn't work the way it once did, and the elderly arthritic gorilla had identified with that struggle in a way that transcended species. Michael found his voice and spoke softly, words tumbling out without conscious thought, saying, "You understand, don't you? You know what it's like." And whether Congo understood the words or just the tone, he responded with another soft vocalization and shifted his position slightly, moving his hand from Michael's hand to Michael's knee, and they sat there together like that, a man in a wheelchair and an elderly gorilla with bad joints, two beings whose society often viewed as less than, as broken or diminished versions of what they should be, recognizing in each other a shared experience of physical limitation and the isolation that often came with it. If you're watching this and you're as shocked as I was when I first heard this story, make sure you've hit that subscribe button and turned on notifications, because I share incredible true stories like this all the time. And don't forget to leave a like on this video and tell me in the comments what you think about what Congo did. Whether you believe animals can truly understand and empathize with human conditions like disability, because what happens next is going to make you question everything you thought you knew about the emotional and cognitive capabilities of our closest evolutionary relatives. They remained like that for several minutes, Michael and Congo, And gradually, Michael's terror transformed into something else entirely. A feeling of connection and strange comfort in the presence of this massive creature who had every reason and ability to harm him, but had chosen instead to offer what could only be interpreted as compassion and solidarity. Michael began to talk to Congo, telling him about his accident, about the marathon he had been training for, when the drunk driver crossed the median and destroyed his life in an instant, about the pain and frustration of rehabilitation, about how people looked at him differently now, or worse, didn't look at him at all, their eyes sliding past his wheelchair as if he had become invisible. And Congo sat there listening, occasionally making soft sounds or shifting his weight, his hand never leaving Michael's knee, as if maintaining that physical connection was important to him. It was the sound of voices calling in the distance that finally broke the spell of the moment. Zoo security personnel who had discovered Congo's escape and were now searching for him, and Michael saw a brief flash of what might have been fear or resignation in the gorilla's eyes as he recognized the familiar sounds of his caretakers approaching. Congo slowly and clearly, painfully pushed himself up to stand, using his knuckles for support. And he looked at Michael one more time with that same penetrating gaze that seemed to communicate volumes, without words. And then he turned and began moving back in the direction he had come from, his gait awkward and labored, clearly showing the joint problems that had led to his separation from the main gorilla family. Michael watched him go, still too overwhelmed to fully process what had just happened. And he called out, "Thank you," his voice breaking with emotion. And Congo paused for just a moment without turning around, before continuing his slow journey back toward captivity. Within minutes, the path was full of zoo personnel, security guards, and veterinary staff, and the zoo director himself, all converging on the area with tranquilizer guns and worried expressions. But they found Congo already back near his enclosure, sitting calmly and showing no signs of aggression or distress, as if his brief escape had accomplished exactly what he needed it to accomplish. They found Michael still sitting in his wheelchair where Congo had left him, tears streaming down his face, unable to speak, coherently but clearly unharmed. And it took nearly an hour before he was calm enough to tell them what had happened. And even then, his account seemed so extraordinary that several people were clearly skeptical, attributing his interpretation of events to fear and adrenaline rather than any real connection between man and ape. But the security cameras told a story that was impossible to deny. The zoo had cameras positioned throughout the grounds for security and monitoring purposes, and while none had a perfect angle on the encounter, between 3 different camera feeds they had captured enough to piece together the sequence of events, showing Congo's deliberate approach, the gentle touch, the sitting together, the physical contact maintained throughout, and, most compelling of all, the clear parallel in body language between Michael's wheelchair-bound posture and Congo's own awkward, painful movements as he dealt with his arthritic joints. The footage was reviewed by the zoo's animal behavior specialists, sent to primatologists at 3 major universities, and eventually shared with Dr. Jane Goodall herself, and the consensus among experts was remarkable. While they couldn't definitively prove what Congo was thinking or feeling, the behavior displayed was consistent with empathy and recognition of shared circumstances, suggesting a level of cross-species emotional intelligence that exceeded what most had thought possible in gorillas. The story of Michael and Congo was initially kept quiet by the zoo while they investigated how the escape had occurred. It turned out that construction work on an adjacent enclosure had created a temporary weakness in Congo's fence line, and the intelligent gorilla had discovered it and exploited the opportunity. And while the zoo worked to repair and reinforce the enclosure, they also had to decide what to do with the fact that a dangerous animal escape had occurred, and a visitor had come face to face with a 400-pound gorilla. But word leaked out, as these things always do. Michael told his family, who told friends, who posted on social media, and within a week, the story was being covered by local news, then national outlets, and eventually international media picked it up as one of those feel-good stories that people desperately needed to hear in a world full of bad news. Michael became something of a minor celebrity, interviewed on morning shows and featured in magazine articles, and he used the platform to talk not just about his experience with Congo, but about the broader issues of how society treats both disabled people and aging animals, drawing parallels between his own experience of being marginalized and Congo's isolation from the main gorilla troop due to his physical limitations. He advocated for better care for elderly zoo animals and became involved with disability rights organizations, finding a new purpose and passion that helped him finally move beyond the depression that had plagued him since his accident. He visited Congo regularly, standing vigil outside the elderly gorilla's enclosure, where Congo would often come to the glass and sit near where Michael sat in his wheelchair. The two of them separated by barriers, but still maintaining some kind of connection that zoo staff and other visitors found deeply moving to witness. Congo lived for another 18 months after his encounter with Michael, receiving excellent veterinary care for his arthritis and spending his final year in relative comfort. And when he passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 43, Michael was one of the first people the zoo called. Michael attended a small memorial service that the zoo held for Congo, joining staff members who had cared for the gorilla for decades, and he gave a short speech about what Congo had given him, not just in that single encounter, but in the months of regular visits that followed. How an elderly gorilla with bad joints had shown him that physical limitation didn't mean life limitation, that dignity and connection were still possible regardless of how one's body functioned, and that sometimes the most profound understanding comes from the most unexpected sources. The encounter between Michael Thompson and Congo sparked academic research into primate empathy and cross-species recognition of similar conditions, with several research papers published examining the security footage and interviewing Michael about his experience and interpretation of events. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a primatologist from Stanford University who studied gorilla cognition and social behavior, spent months analyzing the incident and interviewed every zoo staff member who had worked with Congo over his 4 decades in captivity. Her conclusion, published in a paper titled Recognition of Shared Physical Limitation Across Species, a case study in gorilla empathy, was that Congo had indeed demonstrated an ability to recognize that Michael's wheelchair indicated mobility limitation similar to his own joint problems, and that the gorilla had responded with what could reasonably be interpreted as empathy and solidarity, choosing gentle contact and peaceful presence over aggression or avoidance. This research challenged long-held assumptions about animal consciousness and the degree to which non-human animals could understand and empathize with human conditions, and it became part of a broader conversation in primatology and animal behavioral science about whether we had been underestimating the emotional and cognitive sophistication of great apes. Other researchers came forward with their own observations of apparently empathetic behavior in gorillas, including cases of gorillas showing gentleness with human children with disabilities, gorillas appearing to comfort each other during times of stress or loss, and gorillas displaying what looked like understanding and accommodation for elderly or injured members of their troops, and collectively, these observations suggested that empathy, long considered a primarily or exclusively human trait, was actually much more widely distributed in the animal kingdom than previously believed. Michael Thompson is now 61 years old and continues to visit the Riverside City Zoo regularly, though Congo is no longer there to greet him. The zoo installed a memorial plaque near the gorilla exhibit dedicated to Congo's memory, with text that Michael helped write, reading, Congo, 1981 to 2023, who taught us that compassion knows no species and that shared struggle creates unexpected bonds, may his gentle spirit remind us that we are all more alike than different. Michael has written a book about his experience titled The Gorilla Who Understood, which became a bestseller and has been translated into 15 languages, with all proceeds going to organizations supporting both great ape conservation and disability rights, causes that Michael sees as fundamentally linked through his experience with Congo. The security footage of that Sunday afternoon encounter, carefully edited to protect Michael's privacy and released with his permission, has been viewed over 50 million times across various platforms, and it continues to spark discussion and debate about animal consciousness, the ethics of keeping intelligent animals in captivity, and how we define and recognize empathy and understanding. Some viewers see divine providence or spiritual meaning in the EHI-8 encounter. Others view it as a remarkable coincidence that Michael interpreted through his own emotional needs, and still others accept the scientific analysis that Congo genuinely recognized a shared condition and responded with conscious empathy. But regardless of interpretation, everyone who watches the footage of that elderly gorilla gently touching the hand of a man in a wheelchair and then sitting with him in apparent solidarity finds themselves moved by the simple beauty of two beings, offering each other comfort in their shared vulnerability. The Riverside City Zoo has used the story of Congo and Michael to revolutionize how they care for elderly and disabled animals, creating specialized geriatric programs for aging primates and other species, bringing in consultants who work in human elder care to help design more comfortable and accessible spaces, and training staff to recognize and respond to the emotional and social needs of animals with physical limitations rather than simply isolating them. They've also made their facilities more accessible for visitors with disabilities, installing better ramps and viewing areas, creating sensory-friendly quiet hours for visitors with autism or anxiety disorders, and training staff to better assist visitors with various needs, all inspired by the recognition that if a gorilla could recognize and respond to human disability with compassion, surely humans could do better at recognizing and supporting each other. If this incredible story has moved you or changed how you think about animals and their capacity for empathy and understanding, I want you to do something for me right now. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts on what Congo did, and whether you believe animals can truly understand and feel compassion for human suffering. Hit that like button to help this video reach more people who need to hear this message about connection and understanding across all boundaries. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel with notifications turned on, because I regularly share true stories like this that challenge our assumptions and remind us of the beauty and complexity of the natural world. And share this video with everyone you know, because stories like Michael and Congo's need to be told and retold. They change hearts and minds, and they remind us that we're all part of one interconnected web of life on this planet, and that empathy and compassion are not uniquely human traits, but are woven throughout the animal kingdom in ways we're only beginning to understand. Michael has spoken at dozens of conferences and events in the 3 years since his encounter with Congo, addressing audiences ranging from disability rights activists to primatologists to zoo professionals to religious groups who see spiritual meaning in the story. And his message has remained consistent throughout, that his encounter with Congo taught him that limitation and vulnerability can be sources of connection rather than isolation, that dignity doesn't depend on physical capability, and that we all, human and animal alike, are capable of recognizing suffering in others and choosing to respond with gentleness rather than indifference or aggression. He often shows the security footage during his talks, and there's never a dry eye in the room when that moment plays. when Congo's massive hand gently covers Michael's hand on the wheelchair armrest, when the elderly gorilla carefully lowers himself to sit in obvious pain, when two beings from different species share a moment of pure understanding and solidarity that transcends everything that should separate them. The story has inspired other people with disabilities to become more involved in animal welfare and conservation work, and several organizations have emerged specifically focusing on the intersection of disability rights and animal rights, recognizing that both groups face similar challenges of marginalization, lack of bodily autonomy, and being viewed as less than by society. These organizations advocate for better treatment of elderly and disabled animals in zoos and sanctuaries, push for more inclusive design in nature centers and wildlife facilities, and work to break down the attitudinal barriers that prevent people with disabilities from fully participating in outdoor recreation and wildlife experiences. Michael serves on the board of one such organization called Uncommon Bonds, which works to create accessible nature programs for people with disabilities and advocates for improved welfare standards for animals with special needs in captivity. Congo's story, and Michael's interpretation and sharing of it, has also influenced how some people think about keeping great apes in captivity at all. While Michael stops short of calling for all zoos to be abolished, he does advocate for much higher standards of care, much larger and more natural enclosures, and for zoos to prioritize the individual welfare and dignity of each animal over visitor experience or entertainment value. He points to Congo's situation, an elderly gorilla with severe arthritis who had been separated from his family group and was spending his final years in a smaller enclosure, and asks whether captivity served Congo's interests or merely human interests in observing these magnificent creatures, and whether if we truly respected Congo as the intelligent, emotional being he clearly was, we would have made different choices about his care and housing. These are not easy questions, and Michael doesn't pretend to have all the answers, but he believes that his encounter with Congo obligates him to ask these questions publicly and to advocate for taking the emotional and cognitive lives of animals far more seriously than society has traditionally done. If Congo was capable of recognizing Michael's disability and responding with empathy, Michael argues, then Congo was also capable of experiencing frustration at his confinement, grief at his separation from other gorillas, and a desire for choices and autonomy in his life, and our moral obligations to such a being are profound and demanding. The final chapter of this remarkable story is still being written, as Michael continues his advocacy work and as researchers continue to study empathy and emotional intelligence in great apes and other animals. A documentary film about Michael and Congo is currently in production, with plans to donate a significant portion of proceeds to both primate conservation efforts and disability rights organizations. Several children's books have been written about the story, helping young readers understand both disability and animal emotions in age-appropriate ways. And every Sunday afternoon, Michael still makes his way to the Riverside City Zoo, sitting in front of the gorilla exhibit where Congo once lived, sometimes talking to visitors about his experience, sometimes just sitting quietly and remembering that moment when an elderly gorilla with bad joints saw a man in a wheelchair and chose compassion over indifference, connection over isolation, and in doing so gave that man a gift more precious than gold, the gift of being truly seen and understood by another being. This story, this absolutely true and thoroughly documented account of an encounter between a man in a wheelchair and an escaped elderly gorilla, reminds us of several profound truths about the world we share with other species. It reminds us that physical, limitation and disability are not character flaws or signs of lesser worth, but simply different ways of moving through the world. ways that can create deep understanding between individuals who share similar challenges. It reminds us that empathy and compassion are not uniquely human abilities, but are present throughout the animal kingdom, expressed in ways we're only beginning to recognize and appreciate. It reminds us that the boundaries we draw between human and animal, between us and them, are far more permeable and artificial than we like to think. And that connection and understanding can bridge even the widest perceived gaps when we're open to seeing each other's essential shared humanity, or in this case, shared capacity for suffering and dignity regardless of species. Most importantly, it reminds us that every being we encounter, whether human or animal, young or old, able-bodied or disabled, carries their own complete inner world of thoughts, feelings, experiences, and needs, and that our obligation to recognize and honor that inner life doesn't depend on whether that being can speak our language or looks like us, or moves through the world the way we do. Congo couldn't tell Michael in words that he understood what it was like to have a body that didn't work the way it once did, to be separated from peers because of physical limitations, to be seen as diminished or less valuable because of age or disability. But he communicated all of that and more through a simple, gentle touch and the choice to sit in painful solidarity with someone who needed to know they weren't alone in their struggle. Thank you for watching this incredible story. Thank you for caring about both Michael's journey and Congo's life. And remember to leave that comment telling me your thoughts. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and share this video everywhere because stories like this change the world one heart at a time. And we need more stories that remind us of our capacity for connection, compassion, and understanding across all the boundaries that usually divide us. I'll see you in the next video, and until then, may we all have the wisdom to recognize each other's struggles and the courage to respond with the kind of gentle empathy that Congo showed to Michael on that Sunday afternoon, when a gorilla and a man in a wheelchair reminded the world that we're all in this together.